Hey, Alex, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Could you just quickly introduce yourself as well as the topic we'll be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. My name is Alex Lin. I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service, majoring in international politics, and I'm thinking about minoring in statistics and perhaps also French and Jewish civilization. And we're going to be talking about classes, academia, and perhaps research today. And I'm really excited to delve into those topics.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, the first question, I'll start off a bit easy, but why did you choose your major and what does your major entail?
This sounds like an interview question. But I think I chose my major because I really wanted to. I think this is the major where you really get to delve into some of the most consequential issues around the globe, like climate change, why people don't cooperate, and then interstate conflict. Like these are the consequential issues. And I think other majors sort of don't cover or only cover it tangentially. And international politics is where you could actually head on address some of the hardest issues that humanity or society is dealing with. And I think I spent a couple years in China, so just that experience, I think in terms of the cosmopolitan perspective, really lends itself towards this major, and that's why I really wanted to come to Georgetown to study international politics.
Wow, so when you were looking at colleges, did you already see this major as something you wanted to do, like even before you knew that you were going to Georgetown?
I think I was pretty sure I was going to do this major, so everywhere I applied, I think this was one of my top choices.
Got it. Got it. That's awesome. And I know this major, international politics, it's the biggest major in the SFS and different concentrations.
Most
So
basic major. Anyways.
everyone has their own opinion on it. So what concentration did you pick within IPOL and why?
Foreign policy and processes, and I think honestly a lot of these concentrations are similar in that a lot of classes are overlapping. So I don't have a solid reason for picking it, but I think perhaps I get to use this major to explore anything that has to do with security and law as well. But honestly, all of them have similar selection of classes.
Right, right. Okay, so you're year four as an IPOL major. Walk us through like how the classes at Georgetown have been for you since freshman year, and then for those who don't know, usually in sophomore year, Georgetown students will declare their major,
Yeah.
and that's where the major classes come in. And then junior year, of course, it's a continuation of that. So just kind of walk us through how the classes have been for you since freshman year.
Yeah, sounds great. So I really enjoyed a lot of my classes. So in the beginning, starting to take like some of the more basic ones, like intro to like international relations, comparative political systems, CPS, like some philosophy classes, theology classes. Those are interesting, but I think things get really interesting when you start to be able to like customize your schedule and then look into regions and topics you're interested in. And especially because Georgetown provides you with faculty who have been in the field, who have been at the White House, at the State Department, at the IMF or the World Bank, and or at the Fed, and they've done actual policy, and they've been, in the ringer of like, I don't know, on the negotiating table, and they've like been in that situation. And I think listening to their perspective, their opinions, that's sometimes some of the coolest experiences that I've had at Georgetown. And I've had the fortunate opportunity to take some of these classes. A lot of them have been in the Middle East, and some of them have been about East Asia, especially China. And yeah, really eye-opening perspectives. And yeah, I think that's one of my favorite parts about being at Georgetown, is to be able to take those classes.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious that since you're a senior now and you entered Georgetown in fall of 2019, how was that shift from physical to virtual and then back to physical? How did that affect like the classes or just like how you were learning what you were taking away from them?
I think for a lot of people, it's hard to pay attention virtually. And I feel that a lot of times too. Like when you're in physical setting, it's always easier to like engage with other people. And that was actually a really interesting point that one of my professors brought up as well. And he was talking about, the similar dynamic in a negotiating room where when you're in a virtual setting talking about high stakes issues with like other world leaders, you can't read body language. You can't tell like how they're thinking or what they're feeling. And I think that translates to like everyday situations, like whether it's classes or like, I don't know, uh, I don't know, professional settings, or I guess even extracurricular settings, or even just hanging out with friends. Like being in person helps a lot with in terms of like with the dynamic that you create and how engaging it is. And a lot of times in Georgetown classes, especially, it's about the dynamic you create between people. and communicating between people rather than the more technical aspects that you learn from other majors. So yeah, I think transitioning away from in person and then back into in person has been a really interesting and sometimes challenging experience.
Yeah, probably not what we were expecting
Yeah,
in fall of 2019.
yeah.
I really like that point about like communication over the technical aspects. Can you talk more about how you came to that realization and perhaps like how you've improved on that communication aspect like since coming to Georgetown?
Uh, I like to think I've improved, but I don't know. Um, yeah, so I'm an international politics major, but I'm also a stats minor. So I think sometimes I get to like traverse disciplines a little bit, and a lot of my international politics classes have been really about, um, like interacting with the faculty. A lot of times you do presentations, other times it's about question and answers. So the professor gives some sort of talk or like 30-minute lecture in the beginning, and then you start asking questions. And that's sometimes what you get the most out of the classes. Whereas, in a more technical class, it's like a 20-slide PowerPoint, and then you just take notes off of that PowerPoint and do the homework. So yeah, I think both dynamics are really interesting. And in terms of communication in some of those more, narrative based classes or like conversation based classes, um, I think a lot of times I find it most enriching to ask questions that's hard to answer and questions that's like even challenging like opinions of people who have much more experience than you or who have seen much more than you. I think sometimes those are the most interesting experiences. And it's sometimes hard to do that, but sometimes, you try to push yourself to do that and to participate more in class.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really important.
No, would love to get into that more a bit later.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, like, how did you decide on the minor of stats and also like the other minors you're considering? Because I think something that I have found pretty common is like Georgetown students, there's like a good amount of indecisiveness about majors, but I think it's really with the minors where like people really get indecisive. So I'm curious, like, how you came to your minors that you're either in the process of doing or like considering also adding on.
Yeah, I think this is related to one of my biggest qualms about uh, the SFS and the major and how the curriculum structure is that sometimes it doesn't give you like enough hard skills, whereas it gives you like some amazing, really amazing perspectives and really amazing experiences in class. So I think trying to find stats and also languages like French is a good way to cultivate the hard skills that you need. And so I'm very glad I've done stats and honestly wished I could have picked up more economics related stuff or even more computer science related stuff because when you transition from the academic environment away into like professional environment, a lot of times that's what people look for is like can you use R, can you use Python, do you know what an inference test is or a hypothesis test is? Like these things are really, really useful. And sometimes combining disciplines. So, using statistics in the world of international politics. That's actually what I'm trying to do for my thesis. I think that gives you some of the most interesting and unique perspectives and also valuable perspectives that fill the gap in, what scholars or people in academia are talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's super valid and super cool. And props to you for being able to juggle all of that and still continuing on as you finish up your time at Georgetown. But that all sounds really, really awesome. Let's move on a bit more to a specific story or
Sure. Yeah.
instance. And I think we've talked about this in the past and also are planning to talk about it now. But can you talk about this relationship you developed with a professor that allowed you to pass the classroom, do more work, as well as gain more from this experience?
Yeah, of course. So I took a pro seminar, which is really interesting. It was about fiction and politics in freshman year, and the professor later asked me to be like a TA and an RA. So I've been working with him for like 3 years now, and that's why I'm the sort of center for U.S. realization, trying to get that minor. And their classes are amazing, by the way. And so what I've been doing for him is he has this eclectic mix of interests from like uh, the mix of like the intersection between like sociology and literature to secularism, and then that's more on the government and foreign policy side. So I've been doing research on these things for him for 3 years. We've written like helped him write like 2 books. I've helped him write a paper that's I think trying to get published, and I have also helped him TA like 2 classes at this point, and then helping him TA another class next semester. Um, so yeah, it's a really eye-opening experience, and um, also it's really interesting how in the beginning, you're this scared little freshman trying to, gain research experience, and then afterwards, sometimes that experience becomes more like a dialogue where you provide your perspective on research and classes, and then the professor provides his, and then you have that conversation on a more equal platform and like equal exchange of ideas. So I think that is one of the coolest experiences I've had at Georgetown.
Yeah, and if we can talk a bit more about that, like,
Yeah.
can you talk about that progression a bit more? Like, I definitely can relate to the contrast of like being a freshman and being in that stage versus
Yeah.
now. So, like, how did you see yourself being able to transition and grow from where you were in freshman year in this experience?
Yeah. So I think, um, I guess I guess another story to illustrate sort of this transition was, one of the most extensive and intensive experiences I've had working with my professor is, you know, uh, sort of writing a book on secularism that we ended up actually using in our class, which was super cool. And basically, he started from scratch. We started from scratch, and then we like wrote it from start to finish. And in the beginning, a lot of times it was him asking us, can you find sources on this topic, and then we would go and then find them, and then deliver to professor. But then later, uh, what we started to do became a little different. Where because we had a lot of stuff done, we would like go through together and read through a lot of manuscripts together, and then find stuff that he wasn't satisfied with, and then start editing them. And then that process is very collaborative because I get to say, okay, I don't like this part. Can we change this part? Or I don't, this is a big idea that I don't think is necessary, or I think it's very important. Can we add this in or take this out? And I remember there were a couple of places where there were entire sections that I recommended or we recommended that were either taken out or like added in or placed in another place. So, seeing your mark on his work is very, very cool. And also, I've done like a lot of graphic design or, stats experiences. Like I know for CSA was one, and then for other clubs it was another. And I was actually able to implement some of those skills into, you know, um, helping him. So that was cool. Just to, moving skills around. That was a really cool experience as well.
Yeah, no, I think that does sound like a really cool experience. I'm curious on the flip side, like, were there any moments where you felt like really dumb or you felt like you had failed in some way, or was it mostly smooth sailing in this
Oh
one?
no, there were. I think I always felt like I was like out of my depth because a lot of the research was on topics I've never been really familiar with. Um, because for example, secularism wasn't a topic that I was like super familiar with, and I actually had to read up on most of the stuff that he's talking about to become more familiar with the topic. And then also he has interests in other fields as well, like sometimes it was comedy, sometimes it was like literature, and I've even less exposure to some of these fields. So yeah, a lot of times I've always felt out of my depth. But I guess the main thing is always, um, you know, uh, like reading up on it, spending time on your work, and then no matter how unfamiliar or like nervous you are about your topic, you eventually become familiar with it.
Right. No, that definitely makes sense, and I'm glad you feel more familiar now because I
Yeah.
think that is a really cool experience. On the topic of your other classes, like in the realm of your foreign policy concentration or just IPOL in general, were there any like particularly interesting stories you heard that made you feel like, oh, this is kind of part of the Georgetown experience, or this is like definitely a entertaining part of the major?
Oh yeah, of course. Had experiences where I was taking a China class, and one of my professors was like talking about the U.S.-China relationship, and then his first slide, I remember this so clearly, was the Sunnyland Summit between like Xi and Obama, and he was like showing us a picture, and then this guy and on like sitting right next to the president, and he's like circled it, and he's like, hey, that's me, look at that, and I was like, so you are very qualified to talk about this issue, and also I guess last year was when sort of Russia started invading Ukraine, and that was also when I was taking some of the most interesting classes I've ever taken. And like we would spend 45 minutes in class out of a 2.5 hour class, or even like half the class talking about the implications of the war. So it's a connection between current events and then also what we're talking about, and a lot of times history. And getting that perspective sometimes is cool. And also sometimes it shows you how much those professors don't know, because nobody ever knew what was going to happen. And even after things happen, like everybody's bewildered and everybody has different opinions. And so it sometimes shows you how out of depth they are about a lot of these issues. And also, I had a professor who was like basically in charge of negotiating like nuclear issues with North Korea, and that was super cool as well. That was one of my favorite classes too. And yeah, just being able to hear like their stories about what was going on, I think that's yeah, really cool.
Yeah, no, I definitely can relate to that. I think a lot of the professors here have had very interesting lives. And
Interesting lives, yes.
yeah, when they talk about it, it's kind of crazy to think about, like, now that they're here in front of you, they just seem like a normal person, but they really have done really cool things. So I'm glad you've had those experiences.
Yeah.
And before we get into the reflection, I'm just curious, like, at the near the end, not yet at the end, but near the end of like Georgetown, and you've taken so many cool classes, you've had really good academic experiences, or at least really enriching. What do you kind of want to do long term? And I know what you're doing right after college, but what do you kind of want to do long term? And has that long term goal, or whatever career goal you might have, has that changed from the start of Georgetown to now?
I don't think it has. I think my short term goal has changed wildly, but I don't think my long term goal has changed a lot. So I've always wanted to do like foreign policy related stuff. So I think things like that are still in the books, and also grad school is still in the books. And I've also been really interested in doing like research. So that is still something I'm eyeing long term. So yeah, I don't think my long term goals have changed a lot. And in some ways, being in those classes and listening to those people speak, and also like doing research in a lot of settings has sort of solidified my aspirations for doing similar things. So
Yeah.
fingers crossed that works out. But yeah,
Yeah, no, I hope so as well. Do you think that you'd want to stay in DC long term then to do those specific career goals, or do you see yourself somewhere else?
I would love to stay in DC, but I think also it'll be amazing to be able to explore the world. And I guess that was one of my regrets at Georgetown, was not doing study abroad, similar stuff like that, which would have been extra cool. But yeah, COVID happened, and that made making those plans a lot harder.
Yeah. Well, at least you have your 20s to explore when you
Yeah,
have time.
we'll see.
Okay, awesome. And then to the last part of this reflection, and especially for kids who are a bit younger than you and still going through Georgetown classes, or kids who are considering Georgetown as an option for next year, what are just like quick highs and lows of classes that you've taken from here? If you could sum it up in a few points.
Yeah, of course. Highs of classes would definitely be the discussions you have, sometimes even the arguments you have with people who you learn from, and sometimes the research that you do, and seeing if you can see your name in a byline or things like that. That's amazing. The lows would be the 20-page papers you have to write. The all nighter. I haven't pulled all nighters, but potentially people have to pull all nighters. The all nighters you have to pull, and then yeah, those would definitely be the lows. Is that sometimes the work that you put in. Although I will say, I guess, in terms of majors, um, international politics or anything related to like foreign policy or even political science is sometimes more flexible and a little bit easier on you than some of the other majors out there, and that I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, I
So,
think it's just based on like people's strength, but
yeah,
I see that for sure. And then last question. I know that I would really appreciate it have heard this last year, but for research opportunities for people like trying to get started with that at
yeah.
Georgetown specifically, like what is your advice for that?
Uh, I think a couple of amazing ones. If you want to do independent research, look into Rains and Colorama, and at George, this is at Georgetown specifically, and then those are amazing for like independent research opportunities that are summer and then very unstructured. Writing a thesis is also amazing, and then for like working with other people, reaching out to professors is amazing. Like Europe is great. I haven't done it, but I think uh, it's a good opportunity to do research. And yeah, if you run out of other options, I've heard that even just cold emailing people who you're interested in working with could be really great. And going to office hours for professors is great. That I wish I've done more. So yeah, those are all amazing opportunities.
Yeah, I really like this. I can attest I've done most of those and thankfully
Yay,
have found
nice.
different opportunities. But I think especially with research, it's like a lot of self-starting. Like you have to take initiative. Like I think obviously like classes are mandatory. Like they're basically handed to you. Maybe not
Yeah,
always the ones you want, but like you will be in classes.
yeah,
Same with like other opportunities. I feel like a lot of them just, you can be proactive, but they come to you. But I think for me, like research as an aspect, besides content creating, has been the most like self-starting initiative driven where like you really have to demonstrate your eagerness. So yeah, take notes if anybody who wants to get involved with research. Well, thanks so much, Alex, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your time again. And yeah, I thought that was great.
yeah. Thanks so much for having me.